Thank you all very much. Abraham Lincoln lived for a time in a small little Illinois town called New Salem. One author of a book that I read recently, one of his chapters, he called it New Salem, Lincoln's alma mater. The reason being, the young Lincoln got so much from that little community. Lincoln knew a fellow there who owned several volumes of William Shakespeare, and so he borrowed it, began writing. He became postmaster in Little New Salem, and he was in charge of delivering the mail. Newspapers would come into the postal office. Lincoln read them before he delivered them. Staying up on current events. One of the fellows in New Salem got the idea he was going to form a debating society. Lincoln thought that sounded interesting. He joined. Thought he would become a better public speaker. He did. In 1835, the young Lincoln got the idea in his head that he wanted to be a lawyer, an attorney. Little New Salem needed a good rail splitter and a fellow to help run the general store, which Lincoln also did, and also a postmaster. They didn't need a lawyer. A town of 25 families. Lincoln, by the way, borrowed the law books from a fellow living in New Salem that happened to have a collection of them. He began to read and study. 2 years later, 1837, he took the Illinois bar exam and he passed it and decided he would move to a bigger town. Springfield was close by for him to hang out his shingle, as they say. Unbeknownst to the young Lincoln, at almost the same time that he moved to Springfield, another fellow Kentuckian moved there at the same time, and her name was Mary Todd, also from Kentucky. In 1839, it said that they met for the first time at a dance, social event in Springfield. And the gentlemen were lined up against one wall and the ladies against the other, and they were sort of checking each other out and working up the courage the guys were to ask another to dance, the fair gentleman. Lincoln, by the way, was in the company of several men, including a judge from Illinois, who later he would run against for a seat in 1858 on the Illinois Senate, and then also for president in 1860, one of his opponents, a fellow by the name of Stephen Douglas. So Lincoln spotted Mary Todd across the room. He worked up the courage to approach her. He walked up and he said, "Miss Todd, my name is Abraham Lincoln, and I want to dance with you in the worst way." And Mary told her cousin later that night that that is precisely what he did. He danced with her in the worst way. Now, this next song that I'll do for you, I'm not sure that they danced to it that night. Who knows what they might have danced to, but it certainly would have been with us in 1839. This song's been with us in this country since the late 1700s. And this would be an 1839 correct version of a song called Shenandoah. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to see you away rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I'll not deceive you. Away, I'm bound away, across the wide Missouri. For 7 years I've been a roller, away a rolling river. For 7 years I've been a roller, away, I'm bound away, across the wide Missouri. Oh, Shenandoah, I love your daughter, away you rolling river. For her I'd cross the stormy water, away, I'm bound away, across the wide Missouri. writes books about Abraham Lincoln. Many of them portray him as a man suffering from chronic depression. Lincoln one time said, sometimes I have to laugh to keep from crying. He suffered from what he called the melancholies from time to time. We all do. People who knew Abraham Lincoln, though, say he was probably one of the funniest, humorous men they ever knew. He loved to tell funny jokes and stories, and he liked to hear them. And I want to share with you today one of Lincoln's favorite stories that he would tell wherever he traveled, it seemed. One of his favorites, about Ethan Allen. Ethan Allen, the hero of the American Revolution. And several years after the Revolution, Ethan Allen took a trip to England for a visit. And he found the English that he encountered were rather rude to him. They liked to make fun of Americans, George Washington in particular. At the little boarding house where Ethan Allen stayed in England, the other English who were also staying there thought it would be great humor, very, very funny, to post up a picture, actually it was a portrait, of George Washington in the outhouse out back, the privy. And then they waited for Ethan Allen's response. Well, a couple of days went by, he didn't say a word about it, and they knew he'd been out there. So one evening after dinner, one of the Englishmen said, "Well now, Mr. Allen, what did you think of that lovely portrait of your George Washington that we posted up in the privy out back on your behalf?" Ethan Allen said, "You know, I think that is appropriate. That is indeed fitting. I cannot think of anything that would make an Englishman move quicker than the sight of General Washington." I did clean that up somewhat. From how Lincoln used to tell it. I think you get the message. Abraham Lincoln, I'm sure, enjoyed music. There are lots of instances. For example, one time he recommended to his oldest son, Robert, that he acquire a banjo so that Robert could entertain his father at the White House. Lincoln and Mary were known to go to Ford's Theater on many a night to take in musical performances, ranging from the opera to popular music of the day. Minstrel show tunes were always favorites. And the next song that I'll do for you was written by Stephen Foster. And Stephen Foster wrote a lot of music for minstrel shows. Foster wrote over 280 songs in a short life. He was 37 when he died in 1864, leaving behind songs like Beautiful Dreamer, Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair, My Old Kentucky Home, The Old Folks at Home, Swanee River, The Camptown Races. This one he wrote in 1847. By the time the war had begun in 61, just about everybody, north and south, loved Oh, Susanna. I come from Alabama with the banjo on my knee, going to Louisiana and my true love for to see. It rained all night the day I left, the weather it was dry. Sun so hot I froze to death. Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. I had a dream the other night when everything was still. I dreamed I saw Susanna coming down the hill. The buckwheat cake was in her mouth, tear was in her eye. Say, I'm coming from the south, Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama with the banjo on my knee, with the banjo on my knee, with the banjo on my knee, with the banjo on my knee. I think I might have pulled a muscle on that last note, though. And they're pretty low. Oh, I got to tell you a story about that song. I mentioned school programs. Well, I did a program at one of the elementary schools in Butte just a couple of years ago. When I got to that song, I said, everybody, I'm going to do a song for you called Oh, Susanna. Little girl in the front row, she was second grade, probably about 7 years old, 7 or 8. She said, that's my favorite song. I said, really? Well, can you sing it? Do you know the words? She said, yes, I can. I said, okay, well, how about I'll play the banjo and you come on up here and sing with me. She said, okay. Up she came. I figure she'll be on American Idol about any time now. She needed no encouragement. So I started playing. She started singing. I come from Alabama with a Band-Aid on my knee. I'm going, a what? Band-Aid. Ever since then, every time I do that song, back here somewhere, it's Band-Aid. Yeah. And it wants to come out. Yeah. Wonderful stuff. I want to share with you some things. I love these things. These are homemade cards from kids. Sometimes when I do school programs, weeks later I might get a big manila envelope in the mail crammed with these. Look at that. Every color in the box used for that. That's pretty good. I love that. That's from Elena. And inside, she also has a portrait of Abraham Lincoln there. Can you see that? And facts about the president, so I know she was listening. She pointed out that he was the 16th president and that he led the North during the Civil War and wanted to end slavery. It says it all right there. This is a good one here. I like this one. It looks a little plain. Now, this is deceiving. It looks plain on the front. It's pretty much black and white to Bob Welch from Matthew. Inside, I had told the kids in that program that day, I remember, about the Battle of Gettysburg and a place there called Little Round Top. Well, Matthew drew Little Round Top, and it's got the American flag planted on top. Matthew says, thank you for sharing about the Civil War. Some of the jokes made me spit while laughing. And Matthew drew another little picture here. He and a little friend sitting in their chairs, and the friend in front there says, what was that? And Matthew says, sorry. What do you think happened there? Yeah. This is a good one here. Thanks. Let's see. Oh, here we go. It's red, white, and blue. Thank you for the Civil War songs. This is from Kinley. And Kinley drew a picture of me with a banjo. Can you see that? That's pretty good. That's about as good a likeness as you get of me. That's pretty good. Kinley says, thank you for the Civil War songs. I learned more than I used to know. Says it all. This one's very colorful. I remember this. This was a 5th grader in Des Moines. Look at all that's going on there. At the beginning of the program, I told the kids, all seated in the gym, I said, you know, programs like this remind me of when I was your age, and I met my wife in a program very much like this when I was about your age. I said, look at that little boy or girl next to you. That could be your future husband or wife. Pandemonium broke loose. Once I got it quieted down again, we were able to start the program. Good stuff. Abraham Lincoln received a letter from a little girl once. 11 years old, her name is Grace Bedell, and she wrote to Lincoln in October of 1860, 1 month before the presidential election. She had some good advice for this tall, skinny lawyer that was running for president from Illinois. She said, my father has just come home from the fair and brought home your picture and Mr. Hamlin's. I'm a little girl, only 11 years old, but want you should be president of the United States very much, so I hope you won't think me very bold to write to such a great man as you are. I have got 4 brothers, and part of them will vote for you anyway. And if you let your whiskers grow, I will try to get the rest of them to vote for you too. You would look a great deal better, for your face is so thin. All the ladies like whiskers. They would tease their husbands to vote for you. And then you would be president. It makes perfect sense. Now nowadays, little Grace here, we would call her a political consultant on CNN. Grace says, when you direct your letter directed to Grace Bedell, Westfield, New York, I must not write any more. Answer this letter right off. Goodbye, Grace Bedell. Abraham Lincoln wrote back to Grace. Short little note, 4 sentences long, thanking her for her advice. That letter stayed in her family for years. In the 1970s, her family finally sold it at auction. They got $1 million for the Lincoln letter at that time. The rest of the story is, of course, Lincoln won that election. And in February of 1861, he left his home in Springfield, Illinois, got aboard the train at the station there to make the journey to Washington and become the new president and inherit a world of trouble. The train wound through the countryside on its journey, and wouldn't you know it, it stopped near Westfield, New York, one of the whistle stops. Lincoln got out on the platform, as he would normally do, to make a speech to the crowd who gathered to greet him. He must have had an incredible memory, because that day he looked out over the crowd and he said, "Is Grace Bedell here today?" And a little hand went in the air and waved to him. She was there with her two older sisters. Abraham Lincoln said, "Grace, come on up here, please." She came running up. She climbed up on the platform, and he told the crowd about the letter that she had written to him. And he gave her a kiss on the cheek. And I'll bet you it tickled. He had a new beard he did. That's a true story. Grace Bedell and Lincoln's beard. I'm going to do a song for you that was a popular favorite, I think, for soldiers during the Civil War. Soldiers, I believe, tended to enjoy the songs that were written before the war, that they knew before the war. Probably reminded them of happier times when they were with their families and loved ones. This song was written in 1856, and the unique thing about this song is it would be popular all over again. The same beautiful melody, but with different words, 100 years after it was written. The song is called Oral Lee. When the blackbird in the spring on the willow tree sat and rocked, I heard him singing orally, 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 made of golden hair. Sunshine came along with thee, and swallows in the air. When the mistletoe was green midst the winter snow, sunshine in my face was seen, kissing lips of rose. Orally, orally, take my golden ring. Sunshine came along with thee, and swallows in the spring. The song was written in 1856. 1956, new words for the beautiful old melody. A young man from Mississippi went into a recording studio. He sang, "Love me tender, love me true, all my dreams fulfill. For my darling, I love you, and I always will." Thank you. Love Me Tender. At the beginning of the program, I talked about voices on both sides, North and South, that tried to warn of the impending disaster that a war could bring to this country. Here's another example, a short excerpt from a letter that was written in January of 1861. This is a United States Army officer writing to his son. He said, "They do not know what they say. If it came to a conflict of arms, the war will last at least 4 years. Northern politicians will not appreciate the determination and pluck of the South. Southern politicians do not appreciate the numbers, resources, and patient perseverance of the North. Both sides forget that we are all Americans. I foresee that our country will pass through a terrible ordeal." Colonel Robert E. Lee, United States Army. Lee had served in the United States Army for over 30 years, but when the war began and Virginia, his home state, seceded from the Union, he had a life-changing decision to make, whether to stay with his country's army or to follow his state of Virginia into secession. In his letter of resignation, he said, "I cannot raise my hand against my family." And he swore he would never draw his sword again, except in defense of his beloved Virginia. Robert E. Lee he of course became commander of the Confederate armies, the Army of Northern Virginia. And he lived only 5 years after the war ended, passing away in 1870. At that time, he was the president of a university in Virginia, in Little Lexington, Virginia, called Washington University. It's still there today, thriving, and it's called Washington and Lee University. Robert E. Lee was a respected man before the war in the United States Army. He had at one time been the superintendent at West Point Military Academy. His father's name was Harry Lee. His nickname was Light Horse. He was a cavalryman. George Washington said of him, "I can always depend on Lee." He was a hero of the American Revolution. Robert E. Lee's wife, Mary Custis, well, her name, or rather, she was the great-granddaughter of Martha Washington. Her home across the Potomac River from Washington was called Arlington Place. Today it's Arlington National Cemetery. When you travel in Virginia, and I have had the opportunity to perform there a couple of times in the last few years, and you hear stories about Robert E. Lee, and you see plaques and monuments and statues devoted to his memory. And the last time I was there, I heard this wonderful story that they told me of a little boy who came home one Sunday morning from Sunday school. And he said, "Mama, I am confused. Was General Lee in the New or the Old Testament?" Still a respected man in Virginia. Here's a Confederate song. This was written in the spring of 1861. It's another Irish immigrant. Had it not been for the Irish, we would have no music. His name was Harry McCarthy. Harry lived in Jackson, Mississippi, and on the day that Mississippi seceded from the Union, he was at the Capitol building, and he watched as the United States flag was lowered down the flagpole and a different flag went up. It was a blue flag with a single white star in the middle, and people called it the Bonnie Blue Flag, a symbol of sovereignty, of states' rights, independence for many southern states. Well, within a couple of weeks, Harry had written a song. He was a professional entertainer from Ireland, and he called it the Bonnie Blue Flag, and it tells the story of secession of states from the Union. They're all here. We are a band of brothers and native to the soil, fighting for our blood and toil, and when our rights were threatened, the cry rose near and far. Hurrah for the Bonnie Blue Flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the Bonnie Blue Flag that bears a single star. First gallant South Carolina nobly made the stand. Then came Alabama and took her by the hand. Next quickly Mississippi and Georgia, Florida, all raised on high the Bonnie Blue Flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the Bonnie Blue Flag that bears a single star. Ye men of valor, gather round the banner of the right. For Texas and Louisiana, join us in the fight. And Davis, our loved the president, and Stephen statesmen are. Now rally round the Bonnie Blue Flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the Bonnie Blue Flag that bears a single star. Here's the brave Virginia, the old Dominion state, with the young Confederacy at length has linked her fate. Impelled by her example, now other states prepare to hoist on high the Bonnie Blue Flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the Bonnie Blue Flag that bears a single star. Then cheer, boys, cheer, raise a joyous shout, for Arkansas and North Carolina now have both gone out. And let another rousing cheer for Tennessee be given. The single star of the bonnie blue flag has grown to be 11. Hurrah! Hurrah for Southern rights! Hurrah! Hurrah for the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. All 11. The bonnie blue flag. Thank you all. Thank you all very much. How am I doing on time? What am I? Do I?
What's that? It's a quarter after, so
Oh.
yeah.
Oh, I've got time for a couple hundred more. Loosely, give or take a few. It was April 9th, 1863. General Edwin Stoughton of the Union Army was sound asleep in a farmhouse with his staff in Northern Virginia. In the middle of the night, he was rudely awakened by a slap on his backside. The room was totally dark. Stoughton sat up in bed. He said, "Who's there? What's the meaning of this? Do you know who I am?" Voice in the darkness said, "Yes, sir, General, I do know who you are." He said, "General, are you familiar with Colonel John Mosby, the Confederate cavalry leader in this area?" The general said, "Well, of course I am. We've been trying to catch the rascal. Have you gotten the scoundrel?" Voice in the darkness said, "No, sir, General, but he has got you." Colonel John Mosby and his partisan rangers, as they called themselves, they raided Union supply lines, wagons, trains, carrying supplies, weapons, ammunition, clothing, food, payroll. They called Mosby the Gray Ghost. He and his men, after a raid, would simply disappear. They were actually farmers, shop owners, civilians. But when it came to raiding Union supply lines, they donned a little bit of gray, perhaps a cap or a jacket, trousers. And they became Mosby's partisan rangers, officially the 43rd Virginia Cavalry. Mosby and his men that night made off with General Stoughton and his staff. And they also took a few horses and a dozen government mules. The word reached President Lincoln in the White House a day or so later. He was a little perturbed by what he heard. The first thing he said was, "Those mules cost us $200 apiece." He said, he said, "I can make more generals. I cannot make more mules." Oh, do a banjo tune. Do you like the banjo?
Yes.
Yep. You don't hear a lot of banjo players nowadays. We need more banjo players, kids. We need more banjo players. It's a fun instrument to learn to play. First banjos in this country were made on plantations in the South by slaves. They called them banjers or banjars, and they were crudely fashioned out of instruments that they had known in West Africa. First ones were made out of gourds from gardens, cutting the top portion of the gourd off and then hollowing it out, and then an animal skin would be tacked on here, and a crude one-piece wood neck and some strings. Now these are metal strings, modern strings, but they didn't have steel strings 150 years ago and more. So what do you think they used? Catgut. Yeah, that is true. It's said that catgut made a very resilient and toneful string. If that wasn't available, sometimes they'd find a horse. The long hairs from the horse's tail, they would wind them together with wax to keep them together and then make the different gauges of string. But they didn't have the volume, they didn't have the tone of a good cat. I do school programs and I tell the kids that, and I say, "Now how many of you have kitties?" Hands go up, I say, "Good, time to restring my banjo." Again, after I've restored order. I'm only kidding, I have 2 kitties and they're not contributing to restringing. I'll find a horse. So, a little history there on the banjo. This is a food song. By the end of the war, the Confederate supply lines had been cut off by Union cavalry, many of them from the state of Wisconsin. Railroad tracks in the South torn up, many by troops from Wisconsin. And so the supplies couldn't reach the rebels in the field. They were short of just about everything: clothing, food, supplies, weapons, ammunition, just about everything. One thing they seemed to have in pretty good supply was what the soldiers called goober peas. Goober peas, peanuts in the shell from Georgia. rebels might have been hungry, but they had a sense of humor, I guess. They'd sing this tune. Sitting by the roadside on a summer day, chatting with my messmates, passing time away. I am in the shadows underneath the trees. Goodness, how delicious, eating goober peas. Peas, 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 eating goober peas. Goodness, how delicious, eating goober peas. This is going to be on the next Lady Antebellum album, you know. Just before the battle, the general hears a row. He says, the Yanks are coming. I hear their rifles now. He turns around and wonder, what do you think he sees? The Georgia militia eating goober peas. Peas, 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 eating goober peas. Goodness, how delicious, eating goober peas. I think my song has lasted almost long enough. The subject's interesting, but the rhymes are mighty rough. I wish this war was over when freed from rags and pleas. We kiss our wives and sweethearts and gobble goober peas. Peas, 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 eating goober peas. Goodness, how delicious, eating goober peas. There it is, goober peas. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Earlier in the program, I talked about Stephen Foster, and I mentioned minstrel shows. Minstrel shows were popular forms of entertainment, north and south, from the 1840s right through the turn of the century. Whether you lived in Madison, whether you lived in Minneapolis, or Richmond, Virginia, or Charleston, South Carolina, everybody loved to go to a minstrel show. They were like, I call them a big variety show, usually featuring banjo and fiddle, sometimes a piano on stage. They would sing, they would dance, they would tell jokes, comedy skits. Would you like a little sample of a minstrel show? Just a little bit? Okay, all right. Twist them arm. Let's give this a try. The minstrel shows, come to Madison. Bring some money with you now. You know, quality entertainment's not cheap. You're no kidding. I gotta get into formation. Well, apparently the Rebs are out there. Where was I? Let's see. Oh yeah, the minstrel show. Bring some money with you. 15 cents to get in. It's pricey, but it's worth it. All right, here we go. Rock that cradle, Julie. Oh, rock that cradle, Julie. Rock that cradle, Julie. Don't let that baby cry. Grasshopper sitting on a sweet potato vine. Grasshopper sitting on a sweet potato vine. Grasshopper sitting on a sweet potato vine. Chicken came along and said, he's mine. Rock that cradle, Julie. Oh, rock that cradle, Julie. Rock that cradle, Julie. Don't let that baby cry. You know, before I took up playing the banjo and joined up with the minstrel show, I was going to be a doctor. Yeah, I was. I had to give up that idea. You know why?
Why?
Well, I just didn't have patience for it. Buffalo gal, come out tonight, come out tonight, come out tonight. Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight and dance by the light of the moon? As I was walking down the street, down the street, down the street, a handsome gal I chanced to meet. She was fair to see. Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight, come out tonight, come out tonight. Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight and dance by the light of the moon? All right, now here's a riddle for y'all. Which is faster, heat or cold? Which would be faster? Any idea? Anybody?
Heat.
Exactly. Heat's faster. Shoot, anybody can catch a cold. I asked her if she'd have a talk, have a talk, have a talk. Her feet took out the whole sidewalk when she stood close to me. Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight, come out tonight, come out tonight. Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight and dance by the light of the moon? All right, now here's another riddle for you. See if you can figure this one out, smarties. How many of them rebel soldiers does it take to load a cannon? Any idea? Answer? As many as we can stuff down the barrel. I'm gonna make that gal my wife, gal my wife, gal my wife, and I'll be happy all my life if she was next to me. Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight? Come out tonight, come out tonight. Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight and dance by the light of the moon? There you go, Buffalo gal. Thank you. Oh yeah. All right, I'm going to take you back to the beginning of the show. One more song, one more story for you. At the beginning of the program, I did a song called Old Dan Tucker, written by a 15-year-old boy named Daniel Emmett. That was 1830. In 1859, Daniel Emmett was in New York City. He was working for a minstrel show. He was a performer, musician. He wrote a song in 1859 that everybody loved the moment that they heard it, it seemed. The first night it was performed, it got 7 encores. Play it again, play it again. People were clapping their hands, singing along with Dan's new song. Everybody seemed to love it. Abraham Lincoln mentioned that he liked the song. It was played by the band at his inauguration, March 4th, 1861. Coincidentally, it was played 2 months before that at the inauguration of Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy. The song was written by a Northerner. This man's from Ohio. Dan Emmett's a loyal Union man, supporter of Lincoln. His song went like this. You've heard that before. Written strictly for entertainment purposes, but the Southerners adopted it as an unofficial anthem, it seemed, during the war years. I play this for kids in the schools, ask them to identify it, and usually they know. First answer that comes back is, that's the horn on the car on the Dukes of Hazzard. Yep, it is. But it's also called Dixie's Land, and I also fill them in that the original General Lee did not have a stick shift and a Hemi engine either. Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland, Dixieland, where I was born. Early on one frosty morning, look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray, in Dixie's land. I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Away, away, way down south in Dixie. There's hot wheat cakes and engine batter, makes you fat or a little matter. Look away, Dixieland. Then way down and scratch your gravel in Dixieland. I'm bound to travel. Look away, Dixieland. Wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray, in Dixie's land. I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away, away, way down south in Dixie. Away, away, way down south in Dixie. Thank you all very much. Thank you. General Robert E. Lee said one time, I don't think we could have an army without the music. And it was essential, I think, to the boys on both sides, North and South, and to their families. People expressed themselves through music during those times. Their politics, their loyalty, their loves and hates, their loss and sorrow. And there was a lot of them in those 4 years. Now, General Ulysses S. Grant, Union commander of forces, some historians believe that General Grant might have been tone deaf, what we call a tin ear. There were a lot of episodes during his life that pointed to that. And one time, in fact, a newspaper reporter asked him about his favorite tunes. General Grant said, I know 2 tunes. One is Yankee Doodle Dandy, and the other is not. I know you folks know more than two. Thank you so much for coming today. I want to thank the folks here at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum for asking me to come and do a couple of programs today. And after the letters presentation, I'll be back about 12:30 and do another program for you. Slightly different. We'll have some different stories and songs and some different bad jokes, too. Enjoy that one. If any of you are interested in this music and taking it home, I've recorded 6 CDs of Civil War music. And I have them in my case there. If you'd like to take a look, I'll be happy to show them to you. Thank you all for coming out today and for supporting your Wisconsin heritage and the Civil War and a wonderful museum here. Thank you. With your guns and drums and drums and guns, haroo, haroo. With your guns and drums and drums, and I hardly knew ya. Where are your legs that used to run, haroo, haroo? Where are your legs that used to run, haroo, haroo? Where are your legs that used to run before you went to carry a gun? Indeed, your dancing days are done. Johnny, I hardly knew ya. Patrick Gilmore took the old Irish melody and he wrote new words. When Johnny comes marching home again, hoorah, hoorah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hoorah, hoorah. The men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies, they will all turn out and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. Get ready for the Jubilee, hoorah, hoorah. We'll give the hero 3 times 3, hoorah, hoorah. The laurel wreath is ready now to place upon his loyal brow. We'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bell will peal with joy, hoorah, hoorah. To welcome home our darling boy, hoorah, hoorah. The village lads and lasses say with roses we will strew the way and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. When Johnny comes marching home. When Johnny comes marching home. Thank you all very much.